What would be some of the policy responses that they would recommend in order to tackle this problem? First, the global outlook has deteriorated. I think everybody who reads what's happening to the global economy fully appreciate that the global economy is wobbling. And the Eurozone crisis also has, in addition to a sovereign debt crisis, there's also private sector debt. Take the case of Spain. So in addition to the fiscal cliff, the sovereign debt crisis, we also have a banking and financial crisis in many vulnerable countries. The last one, which was bailed out, even though the Prime Minister appeared decoupling. And it would appear that the secondary effect of what is happening in the US and what is happening in Europe is catching up even. It's amazing. It's the second time in 4 years in the States. Then we thought we got out of it. And since 2010, response crisis, the response to the crisis, the right one. And I hope we're going to discuss this. What I mean by the response to the crisis is in terms of the speed with which they have responded, the timeliness of the response, the adequacy of the response, and last but not least, the adequacy, how effective the response has been. So I think this is crucially important. And obviously for us in Mauritius, we are very concerned because of what happened through the channel of transmission. All of us know the first channel of transmission is basically trading goods and trading services. I don't have to tell you, I think all of you, those of you who have been to Greece realize, not only in terms of politics, not only in terms of economics, but the social consequences of a deeper, longer, and broader crisis of the euro. In terms of employment, in terms of having access to banking and finance, and also in terms of your pension. And third is basically what is the input, the perspective, our two distinguished professors here, on what has been the response up to now. A lot has been done, but the problem is still there. And the next question, what more can be done? Since last week, everybody is speaking about a banking union. Is a banking union the solution to the crisis?
Well, and in my opinion, it mostly got worse, and we mostly got to the point where we are now through macroeconomic mismanagement and later through mismanagement of this crisis. If the right measures had been taken in the very beginning, we could have solved this crisis at very little cost. Now it threatens to derail the world economy. Well, it started with financing problems in Greece, and Greece is not that big. Greece is 2.5% of the Eurozone GDP. So this is really tiny, and you should think that even if that country has public debts of 150%, push the deficit to a level of something like 50% of GDP, and then quickly the debt level started to explode to unsustainable levels. Then there was the IMF EU program. They gave rescue loans and they prescribed austerity, but the austerity had the main impact that it led to a very deep recession. Greek GDP has contracted by 20% since the onset of the structural adjustment programs, and unemployment is now above 20%. This decline in GDP meant that even though Greece has done a lot of cuts in expenditure and has increased taxes, the budget position didn't improve that much, and so at some point, well, the debt level became so high that it was said, well, we need some kind of debt restructuring, which we did a couple months ago. Ireland is different. As I said, there's no problem. If investors believe that the country cannot repay, they demand high interest rates, and that by itself can lead to insolvency. Let me give you an example. Let's assume you have a mortgage on your house, and you earn 3,000 euros, and you pay 5% in interest rate, 1,000 euros on your mortgage each month. And now your bank comes and says, well, your neighbor has lost his job and cannot pay the mortgage anymore. I think you're a little more risky, and maybe you should pay a little higher interest rates, let's pay 25%. They demand 5,000 euros in mortgage payments from you each month. And of course, this directly puts you into insolvency, even if you had been, managed your finances prudently prior to that. And this basically was, very simplified, what has been going on in some of the European countries, where the markets now demand interest rates which are just not sustainable. I mean, Spain is paying more interest rates than countries like Pakistan and Venezuela. At some point, there will be no money coming from the IMF and the EU anymore to Greece, and Greece will not be able to repay or to pay interest rates. That means Greece will be in technical default, and
the second one, you mentioned about Lehman Brothers. This is a paraphrase of Oscar Wilde. And he said, to be caught out by the Lehman collapse might be construed as a misfortune. Not to be prepared for the Greek exit would be sheer carelessness. And the last one, you would like this one, Sebastian. And this is a statement from Upton Sinclair. And he said, it is extremely difficult to get a person to understand something when his salary or his interest depends on him or her not understanding that something. You substitute basically men or women for a country, and you substitute salary for interest, you have it. Is it a case of basically lack of leadership?
You can already withdraw from EMU. Because you would, at once, if you start preparing that, you would have more capital outflows, and while Greece is still in EMU, that they would have to be financed by the European Central Bank, and they in fact become liability of the Greek Central Bank towards the rest of Europe and of an asset of the German Central Bank towards the Greek Central Bank. And I'm not sure whether Germany is willing to finance all the capital outflows from the Greek population towards the rest of Europe so that they can save their capital before they exit. So I don't see any way of an orderly exit here. I'm not quite as pessimistic what the adjustment of Greece is. If you would bring down the debt, and of course you're right, there would be more haircuts required, and these haircuts would have to go to the public sector, because there isn't that much private debt left anymore. So the ECB and the European partners and the IMF has seniority.
The system has relied too long on computer models, on spreadsheets, and on technocratic government. And they have not taken on board basically, what politics is about and what society is about. Now, do you think, again, it's a very tricky philosophical question, that, if you are a fisherman, in Greece, and you say you've relied on all these, I will use a diplomatic term, you have relied on all these computer models, you've relied on all these spreadsheets, you've relied on the men in black coming to tell you what needs to be done, and we're still in deep trouble. The level of absolute poverty is significantly higher in Greece than it was before, and there is no end in sight. So is that not a lack of empathy? That too much reliance basically, on this hardware and not enough on the software? I'm not trying to assign responsibility across countries, for such rigorous implementation of computer models. Where do we go from there? I know this may not be within.
Brought our budget deficit down, now you should do the same. If you look what the Germans did, they brought down their budget deficit from 3.1% in 2002 to, I think it was 0.6% in 2007. So they took 5 years to get it down by 2%.
Stiglitz in New Delhi, what he was saying that the kind of toxic assets made by these, the I-banks or whatever you say, where completely, deregulated market gave these I-banks to put this money in the toxic markets or creating bubbles, right? Now, this creation of the bubble is the main cause of this financial crisis. So you have to put that money for the real productive purpose, right? So why should not be any kind of regulation to put this money or investable capital in the real sector or real productive sector, where we can have some kind of real benefit coming out of that is not in the toxins or bubble making. And I am completely agree with Mr. CEO that kind of you are talking about that Mauritius is not going to give chance to make such kind of toxic assets making the bubble. It should be some real productive investment, right? So that's what should be your take on this?
Can you speak up, please?
Thank you. Thank you. Two simple questions. One, hypothetically, financial crisis and monetary crisis are symptoms of a much deeper crisis, which may be located in the institutions of a given country or region, or within the structure of the economy. So what are those institutions and economic structures that we may deem to be the root causes of the euro crisis? That's question number one. Question number two, regarding the small and vulnerable economies, whether we talk of the small economies like Mauritius or Uganda, I firmly believe that there is no such a thing as a problem if it cannot be solved. But one of the views I seem to have heard from the key panelists was just do nothing, there's hardly a solution. I firmly believe that there is a solution if there is a problem. So no problem, no solution. If no solution, no problem. So what exactly should small countries, because if I had messages from my country, I want things I should ask them to consider. Would going regional solve the problem of integration in the global economy? Would looking for innovatively for domestic markets solve the problem? I know you're going to say certain countries have small populations, but aren't there innovative ways how we can create markets domestically or regionally to overcome some of these vulnerabilities associated with global integration? Thank you.
From Africa, both export and import, it's more diversified now. It used to be north-south axis. Now there's a lot of trade, between China and Africa, a lot of trade between India and Africa, and this is going to increase. And what is interesting, in some cases, it's a two-way traffic. It's a two-way traffic.
To try to get a comment on the panelists on the lessons of the euro crisis for developing countries, because I was trying to make a link between, namely the presentation we had before from Professor Richard Sam on capital controls. I have discussed this previously with some, let's say, heterodox colleagues, and they have thought that perhaps within the Eurozone some capital controls might be needed. And as long as you don't have political union, this might be a second best solution. So, and developing this argument within North-South currency unions or South-South currency unions, mainly when I mean North-South currency unions, it's like dollarization or hard pegs to hard currencies. We have the example of China, which has had a very hard peg to the US for a long time and also has applied capital controls. So that seems to be working for them. And on the other hand, if you are trying to make a South-South currency union, which has been planned by several regional integration agreements, maybe you should consider also not taking away capital controls until you really build a political union.
But for quite some time, not recently, because the structural problems and the economic fundamentals in most of the countries in Europe, they were not reflecting the levels of Europe. This is my first question. Do you agree with that? But secondly, coming to the case of Mauritius, which is more interesting, I think we have an ex-minister of finance here. He can at least give his views to the problems that we are facing nowadays. Now, if you look at the export sector, we all know that we depend on euro. So what is happening is, as euro is depreciating, okay, we are facing a big problem in the country. Now, exporters, the private sector, they are asking for a depreciation of our rupee. But then, recently, the Bank of Mauritius is coming up with a line of credit in terms of euro or dollars. And in addition to that, to the surprise of many people, the Bank of Mauritius is increasing the level of reserves in the country. I don't know, from 4.5 level of impose to 6 and months, okay? And at a very high cost. It is costing the government a lot of money. So what do you feel about that? And my last question is, adjunct to that, is, you know, if the export sector, the exporters are asking for depreciating the rupee, my question is, are they thinking about that? Depreciating the rupee with respect to what level of euro? Because what would happen to euro? For how long would euro depreciate? And what benchmark are we going to use? Thank you.
I mean, you asked whether the euro was too strong. I would say, yeah, it was all about structural problems which are not reflected in the euro exchange rate, and I'm wondering, doesn't the US have some structural problems which might not be reflected in a stronger US dollar? So exchange markets to find a decent and good exchange rate. So this also adds to your next question.
Very interesting explanations. My name is Mdal Fiyum from the University of Georgia. Many times we have experts who argue regarding the global monetary crisis in the United States and Europe. Those argue that most of the time we concentrate on quantitative models and these things, and we are looking for the roots of monetary crisis. We can say the roots come from the banking sector or the financial sector because of credit risk, because of huge loans to different parties in the economy, and this is the main reason of the global financial crisis. On the other side, many people argue that the problem in the United States comes from what is called corporate governance and the ethical behavior of bank managers. And this is the main problem of the crisis. Now, I want to know, based on your point of view, to what extent we can argue that this dimension also critical or significant for Europe, corporate governance and ethical behavior. Or, if we argue we can solve the problem now based on different solutions, can we say in the future we have to concentrate on ethical issue and we need to balance between ethical issues, corporate governance, in addition to economic and financial solutions? To what extent this is realistic? Thank you.
You want to have a go? Or you must make sure that you get the economy right. And that they are not mutually exclusive. And that's why, you know, people will start speaking about PPP, which is not private-public partnership, which is basically planet, profit, and people. And people will include, you know, an element of ethical consideration and also an element of corporate governance. Now, to what extent an overemphasis on regulation, on corporate governance, on ethical values is going to help us address this problem, I don't know. Now, let me ask a final question before I conclude to our two friends. Paul Krugman, in his latest book, you know, that came out I think 2 weeks ago, Let's Get Out of the Recession. I don't know whether you have a time to. I've had a chance zone in the EU and consequences from the Russian economy. A couple of takeaways. First takeaway, I think there seems to be agreement on what is the root cause of the crisis, what is the genesis of the problem, as stated by our two friends from Germany. There seems also to be agreement that there has been a question of too little, too late, and a bit unfocused, that probably we need to do more in terms of policy measures. There also seems to be some agreement that probably we need more